Chapter 12. Victor relieved Kirana of her watch duties early in the morning. She pulled her sniper rifle onto her shoulder over her long white cloak. A fog had settled in over the city, making visibility difficult enough that the position of watch had become more a task of listening for anything out of the ordinary. Of course, Kirana remained vigilant even though there were no sounds. "Are you sure you're feeling okay?" asked Victor. "Whatever," said Kirana. Victor smiled, seeing her apathetic attitude had returned. She turned and walked into the building. Its concrete walls had been coated with graffiti, and the inventory that once made it a retail store had long since been stripped from it, but the shelter it provided was vital as they obtained rest. Journeying to the hot zone required a bit of recovery. Kirana regretted that she had contributed to the discomfort of her team. While she had been touched by the courage and skill that Jonathan had shown, having time to herself on watch let her examine her feelings thoroughly. She had strengthened her resolve to emotionally separate herself from the others, and especially from Jonathan. Affection had no place in a world with so many enemies. She was determined that she would never again feel the way she had as a little girl. Jennifer had found blankets and food on her trip with Victor and Sig. While they had shared the heated contents of cans of something called Spam, the meal had proven disappointing. It had put something in her stomach, though. A better find were the thick comforters that she had found. Kirana was not cold, but she was looking forward to having something beneath her as a cushion. She picked up one of the comforters and placed it carefully on the floor. She pulled off her long white cloak and curled up on her bedding. Sleep came quickly, and it brought dreams to her unconscious mind. Her dreams took her to a time in her past. Of course, night had been difficult to discern in the cold zone. She had lived far enough south that daytime meant a slight glow on the horizon around noon. On the occasion in question, she had stood atop an icy wall next to her father. Her young eyes were treated by the dancing of bright iridescent lights in the dark sky. Hues of blue, green, and lavender streaked across the heavens. They seemed particularly vivid in her dream, and it felt as if she were that little girl again. "Aurora Australis," said her father, "the southern lights." "It's beautiful, Daddy," said Kirana. "Yes," agreed her father with a smile. His thick coat made him seem even bigger to Kirana, which at her young age she equated to being even smarter. She had been bundled up in thick fur to see this with her father as well, and it made her feel smarter too. "It's caused by sunlight," said her father at last. Kirana raised an eyebrow in confusion. "Sunlight?" she asked. "What's that?" Her father laughed. His breath was visible in the cold and resembled a small cloud as it escaped his lips. "You'll learn when you're older," he said. "Oh, is that from the hot zone?" asked Kirana. "Yes," said Kirana's father. "Is it true that people can even go outside without coats there?" asked Kirana. Her father laughed again. "Yes," he said. His voice became more solemn. "But only people who are old enough can go there." "Why is that?" asked Kirana. Her father stooped down and looked her in the eye. The color of the southern lights reflected in his blue eyes as she looked at him. "Our icy castle may be cold," explained her father, "but it is an absolute defense against those that might try to hurt us. There are no divine key guardians left, you know. When you are old enough to defend yourself, that is when you will be able to see the sunlight." "Who might try to hurt us?" asked Kirana. He decided that she had a point. No one had come this far into the cold zone in his lifetime. "Snow leopards," said her father at last. "You know, a snow leopard is very powerful, and most people don't know one is close until it's too late. That's why we always have to keep our defense up." Kirana felt disappointed. She did not like to feel helpless or burdensome, and she always tried hard to help her mother with meals and sewing. Sensing his daughter's disappointment, Kirana's father smiled. "Hey," he said with a grin, "don't miss the lights." She looked into his eyes. His smile was contagious, and before long she smiled back and they looked back into the sky. "Today is going to be a good day," declared her father. "I can already tell." The two of them looked at the lights for several minutes longer. Suddenly a new light appeared on the horizon that was smaller but brighter than the aurora australis. Kirana squinted to try and identify it. Her father had not seemed to notice it, and was still staring upwards. "What's that, Daddy?" asked Kirana, pointing to the light on the horizon. Her father squinted to try and make it out. Suddenly it shot up into the sky, and then began growing larger. "There's another one," said her father, pointing to another location a small distance from the first. Suddenly Kirana's father recognized these lights for what they were, and his eyes grew wide with terror. Kirana had never seen her father look this way, and the expression on his face made her step back. She looked up in the sky again, and realized that she had not identified a pretty light in the distance, but a fiery boulder being catapulted at their icy fortress. "Run, Kirana!" shouted her father. They began running along the wall of the ice fortress as fiery boulders began landing around them. "We have to jump down," shouted Kirana as she sprinted with her father. "No," he replied stubbornly. "We'll move slower in the snow." Kirana had a sense that something terrible was about to happen. "Daddy!" shouted Kirana as a boulder headed toward them. "Move!" shouted Kirana's father as he shoved her out of the way, placing his body in between her and the path of the burning projectile. He ran after her, hoping that he might also escape its force, but it was too late. The fiery boulder slammed into the thick, icy wall of the castle and threw Kirana's father toward her. Steam poured from around the boulder as it rolled with its bright, burning light and melted its way into their fortress. While the sight of the boulder was horrifying, the sight of Kirana's father with half his body charred was far more frightening to her. "Daddy!" screamed Kirana. He looked at his daughter slowly, trying to focus his effort on creating a final comforting memory before he died. Instead, he could only think of the urgency of the situation. "Run, Kirana," he said. He slumped onto the ice, and the puffs of air that had been visible with his breath ceased to appear. Kirana's eyes filled with tears. She looked up into the sky to see dozens of fiery boulders flying through the air toward her home. Kirana sat up with a start, finding herself far away from the icy castle of her childhood and free from seeing the nightmare of her past. She wiped beaded sweat from her forehead and looked around. Sig was the only one awake. He gave her a wide smile. "You're just in time for the sunrise, Kirana," he said happily as he pointed to the window at the front of the building. The sun began shining through, forcing Kirana to squint and turn away in discomfort. "Now that we're not in the middle of the hot zone, it's kind of pretty." "Whatever," said Kirana in annoyance. Sig laughed heartily. "Seems like you're back to your old self," he said. "I guess," said Kirana apathetically. Sig turned and faced the sun. He took a deep breath and smiled again. "It's going to be a great day," said Sig. "I can already tell." Sig's words made Kirana's eyes grow wide. She spun around to face him. A mixture of shock and horror shaped her expression. Sig's smile faded. "What?" asked Sig. Kirana turned away and tried to shake the emotion from her, as if it was dust that had accumulated on her face instead of shock. "Nothing," she said at last. "Never mind." As the others slowly got up, they gathered their belongings and ate some more Spam. Jennifer shuddered with each bite, but she was hungry enough to swallow it down. Lucas scarfed it down quickly. "Hey, this is pretty good," he said. Sig laughed. "We need to get additional supplies," said Daniel, "especially if we're going to go track down another key." "That's true," agreed Lucas. "We are running low on ammunition as well. Let's spread out and see if we can scavenge up some supplies. And remember, even if it doesn't seem valuable to us, we might be able to sell things or barter later, so keep an open mind." It was not long before they split into small groups. Victor and Jennifer went together. Sig and Lucas walked a different direction. Seeing her options for avoiding a pairing with Jonathan diminishing, Kirana grabbed Lizard's arm before Jonathan approached her. "Let's go, Lizard," she said. Lizard followed her out of the building. "Wait," said Jonathan. "What?" said Daniel in a gruff voice. "Am I not good enough?" Jonathan rolled his eyes. "You know that's not it, Doctor," said Jonathan. "Well, to tell you the truth, I'm not exactly thrilled with Lizard right now," said Daniel. "So while I understand you aren't getting an opportunity to pretend like you're making progress in your romantic pursuits with Kirana, think of accompanying me as doing me a favor." "What's the deal with Lizard?" asked Jonathan as he began walking out of the building. "He doesn't really know what happened to him in Zeta 28's lab," said Daniel, "and he isn't trying to find out." "Isn't that kind of normal for him?" asked Jonathan. "He doesn't seem like the type that enjoys getting a physical," he added, using air quotes. "No," shouted Daniel. "Do not use those ridiculous air quotes in my presence." Jonathan laughed. Jennifer was glad to be with Victor. She smiled widely as he helped her climb the large chunks of concrete that had once formed stairs leading to a small cluster of buildings. She pretended to look around for items that might be useful inside these shops, but in truth, she was asking herself why she felt this way around him. Though he was strong and had broad shoulders, he was no Sig. Of course, Sig was titanic, and only her memories of Drew Baker provided a close comparison relative to Sig. Though he was smart, it was clear that Lucas was the brains in their operation. She concluded that his appeal came from his balance. He had something that made him helpful to everyone generally. Still, she had met other men that were well-adjusted, but she did not feel so short of breath around them. "I think I've found something," said Victor with a smile. "What is it?" she asked as she rushed to his side and returned his smile. "It's a bunch of cable," he said as he pointed to a box on a shelf that contained a spool of copper wire. "It's more than Lucas will want to carry, but this will be great for bartering." "That's fantastic," said Jennifer sincerely. He picked it up as they moved to the next abandoned building. As they went into the door, it was clear that this building was once an eating establishment. There were tables situated in the middle and booths against the walls. The back of the building had a large empty tank with colored pebbles on the bottom and artificial coral structures positioned on them. As they approached, they noticed dried skeletons of fish that rested on the dry-colored pebbles. Jennifer looked back, and against the interior wall, she saw the name of the restaurant, Phillips, engraved. Her mouth opened in surprise. "Phillips?" she asked. She whirled around to look at the empty fish tank and the kitchen behind. "You know this place?" asked Victor with interest. Jennifer examined the room for another few moments. "Yes," she said at last. "This place was great. The owner was the sweetest, plumpest man you could ever meet. The music was so lovely here. They had this dish with pasta and meatballs and mushrooms. It was so flavorful." She turned and looked at Victor. "I'm sorry. I'm going on and on when we should be looking for something," she said. "I'm going to make us late, won't I?" Victor smiled and shook his head. "You know," said Victor, "my parents used to talk about how wonderful the Golden Age was, and how important it was for humanity not to give up what was lost. Listening to the stories and reading the records was always difficult because I felt like it was too good to be true. Even seeing Lucas hold the literal key of origins seemed surreal. But when he told us that yours was the time key, suddenly everything clicked. You are a link to the Golden Age. You are real. You are the proof that humanity is capable of appreciating beauty and kindness." Jennifer blushed slightly as he spoke. "You're very kind, Victor," said Jennifer, "but I don't even know how I got here or why I am here. I am happy that I met you, though." As the words left her mouth, she was surprised by her sudden boldness. She looked into Victor's blue eyes, searching for an indication that she was not out of place. "I can't help but believe that it is more than coincidence that brought you here," continued Victor. "I think Sig is right. I don't know what pasta is, but I think meatballs and mushrooms and music can be restored. I'm really glad you're here, Jennifer." Victor smiled and then turned to search the kitchen. Jennifer grinned as his last words hung in her mind. "I'm really glad you're here, Jennifer." Eventually, they found a couple cans of vegetables and joined the others back in the building in which they had spent the night. Lucas was thrilled to see the large spool of copper wire, and Daniel was glad of the vegetables to add some nutritional supplement to the meat. The others had collected some additional radios, knives, rope, packs, canteens, and Lucas found parts to repair his pump-action shotgun. Now that they were rested and prepared, they began moving south. Further through the city, they began to notice signs of greater destruction. Melted concrete and heaps of rust or ash appeared in various places with greater frequency. After traveling for several hours, Daniel requested a break. Lucas was satisfied since they knew some arms dealers nearby. Sig decided to stay with Kirana and keep watch while Jonathan and Victor accompanied Lucas with the goods they had discovered. After a few hours, they returned with additional ammunition and food. Eager to move on, the group began moving south again. The evidence of war and destruction seemed to increase with every step they took. Skulls and broken weapons could be spotted in greater frequency. "What happened here?" asked Jennifer, who was finally unable to contain her shock. "I don't remember anything like this." "We're in the temperate zone," explained Victor sympathetically. "It doesn't look very temperate," said Jennifer in confusion. "Temperate, as opposed to hot or cold," explained Lizard with air quotes. "Oh, I guess that makes more sense," said Jennifer thoughtfully. "It is the most fiercely contested area in the world," explained Daniel. "Although the temperature is friendlier to living things, this is a place where no one understands how precious life is. People from various factions constantly war over control of land that should be used to produce food. I heard that there are fire demon worshippers who were gaining traction, but that they suddenly left," said Lucas to no one in particular. "Where did you hear that?" snapped Kirana. "The ammo peddlers with whom we bartered," said Lucas indifferently. Sig turned and gave Kirana a look of sympathy. She lowered her head in anger. "Are you all right, Kirana?" asked Sig. "Peachy," replied Kirana coldly. Sig frowned, which made everyone feel a bit uncomfortable. An awkward silence remained for a few more moments before Jonathan attempted to cheer everyone up. "So, how about those ammo peddlers?" asked Jonathan. "It goes to show why marrying your cousin is a bad idea, am I right?" Lucas laughed. "Wait, what happened with them?" asked Jennifer. The change in subject put everyone but Kirana at ease. "They were very kind," said Victor. He did not want to mock someone that had actually been of help to them. Helpful people were in short supply. "Yes, they're always quite helpful," agreed Lucas. "It's just—" "Just what?" asked Jennifer impatiently. "They had arms growing out of the sides of their heads," said Jonathan. "Really?" asked Jennifer. "It's true," said Victor. "They had a very impressive maneuver where they walked on their head hands." Jennifer smiled. "They would have been great in a circus," she said. "A what?" asked Victor. "You know," said Jennifer. "A circus?" "No," said Lizard. "We definitely don't know." "Circuses are wonderful," said Jennifer. "And none of you have been to one?" Everyone shook their heads, except for Kirana, who was ignoring the conversation. "You're remembering more, my dear," said Daniel enthusiastically. "I guess I am," said Jennifer with a smile. "So I guess circuses aren't just for people with arms on their heads?" asked Jonathan in a confused tone. "No, I wasn't in one," said Jennifer. "At least I'm fairly confident of that. It was entertainment. There were talented acrobats, clowns, animals, and of course popcorn." "Popcorn?" asked Lucas. After another awkward silence, with Jennifer trying to remember what popcorn was and why it was appealing, Sig spoke up. "Well, no matter," he said with a wide smile. "We're glad you're here and not in a circus." She laughed. Suddenly a large explosion a few yards away from them made everyone freeze. "Take cover," shouted Sig. "We're approaching a war zone." Of course, no one actually needed Sig's direction. They were already locating large chunks of metal and concrete behind which to take cover. "Sig!" shouted Lucas. Sig rushed up to him as he continued. "We need to send some scouts to identify and clear a good path. It makes sense for Lizard to head out southwest, and perhaps Jonathan and Kirana to the southeast." "Did you hear that?" shouted Sig to Kirana, Lizard, and Jonathan. They nodded. Lizard scurried southwest quickly. Jonathan was beaming in anticipation of time alone with Kirana. Kirana shifted nervously at the thought of being stuck with Jonathan. Slowly they began moving southeast. Kirana and Jonathan eventually made their way to an area with good visibility. They spotted a trail that had been carved out and then abandoned by some militia, and there were only a few perimeter guards that impeded the way. "It's not likely that Lizard will find a better path than that," said Jonathan enthusiastically. Kirana nodded in agreement as they made their way toward the machine gun battery to take it out. They carefully took cover behind a heap of rubble and watched for an opportunity to strike. As they peered at their target, they quickly saw that it was a group of augments that manned the battery. Unfortunately, they also had a powerful sensor with them that had some sort of eye augmentations. "Two of them, that way," shouted the sensor. A moment later, machine gun fire kicked up dust all around their protective heap. "Not good," whispered Kirana. "They're providing cover for a couple of them getting close." She pulled out her sniper rifle and fired a couple rounds in the general direction of their target. Jonathan pressed his hand to his mirrored key as he drew a sword. "Keep firing, Kirana," he whispered. "Give me some cover." Kirana scowled, but did as Jonathan asked. Jonathan leapt over the heap of debris. Kirana fired toward the machine gun to buy time for Jonathan. She was surprised and impressed as augments went flying from the place where Jonathan had leapt. A moment later he sprinted toward the machine gun turret as his long white cloak floated behind him. "Idiot," whispered Kirana as she took aim at the turret and fired a few rounds. "You're gonna get yourself killed." She continued firing at the turret. To her surprise, through her scope she saw Jonathan appear to preemptively dodge the machine gun fire and then quickly slash through the sensor and the gunner. After ensuring the area had been cleared, he ran back to Kirana. "Thanks for the cover," he said with a smile. "So," started Kirana hesitantly. Jonathan paused, waiting for the words to fall from her lips, like the hungry children in orphanages waiting for their daily meals. His attention made the question more awkward to ask, but she was determined to find an answer. "Did you read their minds?" "I guess so," said Jonathan with a shrug. "I'm not sure I fully understand how it works myself." "Have you read my mind?" asked Kirana nervously. "No," said Jonathan in a reassuring voice. "I have decided that I don't want to pry into the mind of a friend without their permission. I have only read the minds of enemies." "Good," said Kirana with relief. "Keep it that way." She turned and began walking back to the others. "Kirana?" asked Jonathan nervously. She ignored him. "Kirana, I don't have to read you to know something is bothering you." "We should let the others know we've cleared the way," said Kirana, ignoring his concern. Jonathan jogged to catch up to her. "Kirana, I just want to help," said Jonathan. "No, you don't," she replied apathetically. "Yes, I do," insisted Jonathan. "If you would just tell me." Kirana spun around and narrowed her eyes in anger. "Jonathan, I'm not stupid," said Kirana. "I don't have to be a mind reader to know that you have feelings for me. But however you thought this conversation would go in your daydream is not actually going to happen. Just leave me be." Kirana whirled away from him and continued walking. He lowered his head. The sting of her words was terrible, and he tried to inventory every word and every action he had taken to see if he could figure out what he had done wrong. Thinking about it made tears form in his eyes. He blinked rapidly, attempting to wrap himself in the guise of apathy. Of course it was unsuccessful. Kirana knew what she had done to him. She was busily convincing herself that it had been the right course of action. She thought back to the moment that she saw her father sacrifice himself to preserve her. She could not allow Jonathan to love her. If he stopped loving her, then he would be far less likely to try to pull some idiotic hero maneuver and get himself killed. Ever since she saw her father die, she had sworn that she would never watch someone she loved sacrifice themselves for her. And for as long as she had tried to fight it, in her heart, she was forced to confess that she loved Jonathan Knight. Lizard and Daniel were having a heated argument when Jonathan and Kirana returned. "Lizard, you don't know what all that augment did to you," said Daniel. "And you do?" asked Lizard with air quotes. "I'm telling you," said Daniel gruffly, "that creature that she created fooled all of us." "Jonathan knew," observed Victor. "Yeah," said Lizard triumphantly. "Jonathan knew." "You're not helping, Mr. Lee," said Daniel angrily. "He said he didn't want an examination," said Victor. "You should let him be." "Yeah," said Lizard with a spiteful smile. "Let me be." "Stop it with your infernal air quotes," shouted Daniel. He turned to Sig, hoping for help. "Sig, talk some sense into Lizard," said Daniel. "He might have a tracking device or some other problem. It's for his good as well as ours." "Lizard," said Sig, "will it really kill you to let him do the exam?" "It might," replied Lizard with a shrug. Sig turned, noticing Jonathan and Kirana. "We cleared a path," said Kirana coldly. "Well, I guess we can't have an examination right now anyway," said Sig with a wide smile. "Time to move out." Daniel rolled his eyes and gathered his things. Lucas helped him pack. "Doctor," whispered Lucas, "I share your concern, but I ran a scan for tracking devices, and he came through clean. I would have thought Jonathan could tell whether or not he was another clone." "Jonathan isn't reading us," whispered Daniel. "It's actually quite mature of him, but it means he might not know. I do appreciate the scan, Mr. Flynn. That makes me feel a little safer. I would hate to think that one of us might be a wolf in sheep's clothing." "I'll keep an eye on him, Doctor," said Lucas sincerely. "Thank you, son," said Daniel with a smile. Suddenly their attention was drawn by the roar of a motor and a familiar echoing screech. A huge truck moved down toward Lucas. Sig threw him out of the path of the vehicle. There was a flash from the back of the truck, and a weighted net flew out and wrapped around Sig, knocking him down. The truck continued away, and the line attaching the net to the truck became taut in a matter of seconds. Sig began skidding across the ground. The others began firing blasts at the truck tires as Sig was reeled into the back of the vehicle. After a few moments, Kirana shouted to the others. "Stop!" she shouted. "You'll hit Sig." They ceased their firing. Victor turned to Jonathan. "Do you know where they are going?" he asked. Jonathan touched his key, and his eyes glowed for a few moments. They waited as he stood motionless. Finally, after a minute, his eyes ceased glowing and he gathered his breath. "Deep in the cold zone, there is a ruined ice castle that the screaming augment is headed to for his delivery," said Jonathan. He turned to Lucas, whose eyes were also glowing as he gripped his key. "That happens to be our destination anyway," said Lucas. Kirana looked at the ground. Jonathan noticed her discomfort. "You know something about this place, Kirana?" asked Jonathan. She shook her head. "Not anymore," she replied. Of course, that was only partly true. There was only one structure deep in the cold zone that could be described as an ice castle. It was the place she was born. It was the place where her father had sacrificed himself to save her. It was the palace of the snow leopard. Today was not going to be a good day.